Okay, so in this lesson, we're going to be talking about punctuation rules, specifically in regards to capitalization, commas, and quotation marks. So first, let's talk about capitalization rules. The first rule you need to know is that you always capitalize proper nouns. So a proper noun is a name for a person, place, thing, or event. So for example, I would capitalize names like Amanda, George, Benny, and Elizabeth. I would also capitalize places like New York, West Palm Beach, Disney World. I would also capitalize the proper noun for things. So, for example, a proper noun for a brand would be Sony. Proper noun for a car, Ford. Proper noun for a planet, Neptune. And I would always capitalize the proper noun for an event. For example, World War II, the Great Depression, and the Civil War. The next thing you need to remember is you want to capitalize all significant words in the title of books, magazines, stories, movies, and other media. Do not capitalize articles in these titles. So an article is a, and the. You also don't want to capitalize any prepositions that contain 4 or fewer letters. For example, as, at, of, on, for, or in. Now, if the article or the preposition is the first letter, so in the first word of the title, then yes, you always want to capitalize that because you always want to capitalize the first and the last words in a title. So for example, looking at some books, The Scarlet Letter. You'll notice that the, even though it is an article, since it is the first letter, then you are going to capitalize it. Of mice and men, same thing. Of is a preposition, but it is also the first word of the title, so therefore it must be capitalized, and same thing with The House on Mango Street. Now in regards to magazines, you have the New York Times, Time Magazine, and Glamour. These are all supposed to be capitalized. Movies, A Bug's Life, A Walk to Remember, The Little Mermaid. They all start with articles, which is why they always have them capitalized at the beginning. But again, all significant words in the titles must be capitalized. Let's continue with capitalization rules. You always want to capitalize the first letter of a sentence, even in a quotation. So you've learned this in kindergarten, but for some reason when you do quotes, sometimes we forget. So for example, if I said, my mother said, your father will be home shortly. Well, your father will be home shortly is a complete sentence, and so therefore you need to capitalize the Y in your, because it is the first letter of the sentence. If I were to say, I know, I replied, he told me yesterday. So he is the beginning and I is the beginning of the sentence, and so therefore they must be capitalized. You always want to capitalize names of relatives that indicate family relationship. So, for example, if I were to call my mom, mom, or my dad, dad, those are titles that I have given them. Those are names that I have given them that indicate their relationship to me. And so therefore, because it is used as a name, it must be capitalized. So if I were to say, dad said that mom will pick you up, well, these are names that I've given them. I could also say, do you want to go over to grandma's house this weekend? Well, grandma is the name that was given. So therefore the G should be capitalized. I could also say, what did Uncle Jack say to you? Well, uncle is part of the name that I've given him, and so therefore the U in uncle needs to be capitalized as well. So Uncle, Jack, both are capitalized. You also want to always capitalize the word I. So whenever you're typing, this actually happens a lot, especially in programs like Google Docs. It does not automatically capitalize the word I for you. And this happens a lot in the FSA, where you're trying to use the word I in a quote or what have you, and you type it and it doesn't automatically capitalize it for you. So you need to remember that you always have to capitalize the word I when it stands alone. Continuing with capitalization rules, you always want to capitalize a title that precedes a name or a title that addresses someone directly. So for example, if I were to say, I wrote to President Trump the other day, the president is the title for Trump. Because it's preceding or coming before his name, it needs to be capitalized. Now, if I had said, I wrote to Trump, comma, the president, then in that case, president would not be capitalized because it's not coming before his name. It's his title, but only when it comes before the name does it get capitalized. Now, if I were to refer to him as solely just the president, that is me replacing his name with his title. So his title becomes the name. So I would still capitalize it. So if I were to say, good afternoon, President, this is still needing to be capitalized because president is now his name. Now, don't capitalize a title that follows a name. So for example, if I were to say, I also wrote to Pence, the vice president. Now, because the title vice president is coming after the name, it is not part of the name, and so therefore it does not need to be capitalized. But you always want to capitalize countries, nationalities, and languages. So for example, in countries, England, Spain, Australia, Japan, nationalities, American, Hispanic, Venezuelan, and then languages, English, Spanish, and French. These all have to be capitalized. Let's move on to commas. So the first rule of commas is you want to use a comma to separate 3 or more items in a list or a series. So for example, if I were to say I ate pork, comma, rice, comma, and beans, that should be a period. These are a list in a series. I could also say I need to buy milk, comma, eggs, comma, bread, comma, and water. The list can continue as long as it needs to, adding a comma after each thing in the series. You also want to use a comma between 2 adjectives that describe the same noun, only when the word and could be used in between. So for example, Jason is a handsome, charming boy. So if both adjectives are describing the same noun, and you can put the word and in between them, then you know you're supposed to put a comma there. So I could say, Jason is a handsome and charming boy. So in this case, I would have to put a comma. I could also say Melissa is a sweet young girl. So same thing. I could say sweet and young girl. So therefore a comma should go there. You also want to use a comma before and after a word or phrase that renames the noun. So for example, David, comma, my brother, comma, is tall. My brother renames the noun. So basically it is the same. It's one and the same. So I could say Miss Wilson, comma, my teacher, comma, is amazing. So whenever you are renaming whatever it is that you're talking about, you need to use commas before and after. So Trump, comma, the President of the United States, comma, is old. So therefore, I have to use a comma before and after whatever is being renamed. Continuing with comma rules, you want to use a comma when a sentence starts with an introductory word or phrase. For example, if I were to say, yes, you can stay up. Yes, comma, you can stay up. No, comma, I don't want to eat pudding. However, comma, she was really interested. So you have to use a comma whenever you're going to start with an introductory word or phrase. Well, comma, I was thinking about going, but not anymore. However, comma, he did say that he wanted broccoli. You also want to use a comma before and after a word is used as an interrupter. So the dog, comma, however, comma, was not trained. Or in regards to the presentation, comma, unfortunately, comma, it didn't make the cut. Continuing with comma rules, you want to use a comma between a city and state and after the state if the sentence continues. For example, if I were to say, I was born in Miami, Florida, Miami, comma, Florida, and since the sentence continues, I have to put a comma after Florida. So I was born in Miami, comma, Florida, comma, in July. Okay, you also want to use a comma to separate the day of the month from the year and after the year if the sentence continues. For example, we moved to Florida on May, 27, 2009, and since my sentence continues, I put a comma and have lived here since. Okay, you also want to use commas when a sentence begins with a prepositional phrase, an adverbial clause, or a dependent clause. So I'll show you what each one of these look like. So a prepositional phrase is a sentence that starts with a preposition. So, under the bridge, there lived a troll. So you want to put a comma after the prepositional phrase, which is under the bridge. Also, adverbial clause is basically a clause starting with an adverb. So after, or adverb action verb. So after getting braces, so getting braces is my adverbial clause, I ate soup. So then again, after the adverbial clause, comma, I ate soup. Okay, then you also want to use it for a dependent clause, which is a sentence part, not a whole sentence. It's just a fragment that cannot stand on its own. So because he was hungry, comma, he ate the apple. Now you only use it if the dependent clause is at the beginning of the sentence, because if it's at the end, you don't need a comma. Okay, last comma rule. So you want to use a comma to interrupt direct quotations or before and after direct quotes. So for example, if I was interrupting, why, comma, I asked, comma, must you leave? So with the interruption, it goes before and after. It goes before when you have the quotes. So we need milk, comma, I said. And it goes after. So he replied, comma, I know. Okay, let's move on to quotation rules. So in regards to quotation marks, you want to use them only for direct quotations. You don't want to use them for indirect quotations. For example, close the door, shouted Dad. That's exactly what he said, so that's direct quotation. An indirect quotation would look like this. Dad said, close the door. You also want to use quotation marks for titles of publications that are parts of bigger publications. The bigger publications should be underlined or italicized. So for example, quotation marks should go over stories, songs, poems, articles, TV episodes, while books, albums, magazines, periodicals, TV shows should be underlined because stories are a smaller publication inside of books. Songs are a smaller publication inside of albums. Poems are also in books. Articles are a smaller publication inside of magazines, same with periodicals, and TV episodes are a smaller publication inside of TV shows. Now, in regards to other punctuation and quotation rules, when a question is asked inside quotations, you have to use a question mark instead of a comma. So for a statement, though, you're going to use a comma instead of a period. So if I were to say, when are you leaving, the question mark actually goes inside of the quotation mark, and I would still have a period at the end, even though I'm missing my period there, but I would have a period there. I'm leaving soon, instead of putting a period at the end, I would put a comma because my sentence isn't over. It still says he said. So I would put a period at the end. When a question ends with a title in quotations, you actually have to place the question mark on the outside because the question mark is not part of the title. This is the only time that punctuation is placed outside of quotation marks. Usually it's inside. So for example, this would be incorrect. Do you like the song, comma, Let It Go with a question mark inside quotation marks? The question mark is not part of the title Let It Go. It's not Let It Go, it's Let It Go. So this is the correct way of doing it. Do you like the song Let It Go with a question mark on the outside? I know it looks wrong, but it actually is correct. Okay, so those have been some basic punctuation rules. Hopefully you can understand them a little bit better and you've been able to take some solid notes on them. We are going to be playing a coot with this later, so study up so that way you can do well.